on today's episode, it is one of our favourites. It is our FAQ episode. So we answer your questions. We talk about how to sell your personal project. We talk about creativity. We talk about quality of light. We talk about, is social media still worth it? We talk about creative process for commercial work, how Greg got on with his Fuji move. There is so much in this episode. I'm just going to end this right now. Grab a drink, get into it. We had to split this one into two, which we're going to record the second half of later because there's so much that we talk about. So I hope you enjoy it.
Morning. How you doing, Tom?
Yeah, I guess this could be. Oh, yeah, it is still morning. Yeah, no, I'll give you that. I'll give you that for another 6 minutes. But yeah, no, I'm great. Actually, if I'm honest, everything's a bit quiet though, and from what I can hear, that every single person that I speak to is also pretty quiet. But apart from that, you know, hopefully things by the time this show goes out, hopefully things will be busying up a bit as the new budgets get released and hopefully everyone will be all right. I think
it's a bit of that time of year just before the kind of, you either have a flurry of work in March, in the UK at least, because of the tax year ending kind of 5th of April, you have either people having to spend their budgets or people having no money in their budgets left.
And I think this year it's basically been the budget's dried up way earlier than anyone thought because things are costing so much.
Yeah.
You know, without being funny, people's budgets would have been agreed years ago. And now they're kind of going, oh, God, yeah, turns out printing costs and advertising, electricity, everything's gone up.
Yeah, so, plus post-COVID budgets, you know, they're kind of, these would have been planned for in kind of times when people were still unsure of what was going on to some extent.
So fingers crossed, it busies up. I'm sure it will. And by the time this podcast actually comes out, because we're recording this, sorry to spoil the magic, we're recording this before the one that you've just listened to. We can cut that. We can cut that bit out if you don't want me to completely ruin the magic. Completely ruin the magic.
We've recorded. We record the intros later, more in line with when they're about to go out. So
yeah, trying to stay relevant.
Yeah, man. Anyway, speaking of not having any work and not wanting to spend money, what have you spent money on?
I don't think I've spent as much. I don't think I've spent as much as you. But what have I
spent money on?
What have you spent money on? Hang on, you spent money as well, haven't you? Okay, well, I'll go with my bit because I'm only buying bits of kit that I really, really need. And so, I mean, here's the thing, right? Let's go back to the great simplification, which all our listeners are probably bored of hearing about by now. But the responsible people, for example, at CVP, my account manager at CVP, I asked him to quote me for a bit of gear the other day, and he replied to me saying, "I will sell you this if you can show me your working that you can justify that it will pay itself off within a year." And I was like,
I don't think anyone else has got to a point where somebody from a shop is denying selling them something. but this is. I mean, I've chatted to all my account guys and have said, you know, I'm trying to kind of rein in the spending, and they've all gone, oh, okay, well, it's responsible. But I did. They've had to cancel their Christmas parties when you said that. They were like, oh, sorry. Yeah.
This is it. Maybe that's where all the money in the
bonuses this
gone.
Year, chaps.
But yeah, so big shout out to CVP for actually looking after me and being super responsible, and thank you. But I did buy these little beauties, which are the Deity TC1.
Deity, isn't it?
Deity TC1. Okay. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, it'll be more familiar to the people who shoot video. Let me see if I can get in focus. There we go. It is a timecode device, and so you get 3 of these little timecode boxes, and they're excellent. And timecode is basically a signal embedded in the metadata of the video files, which means that all the video and externally recorded audio are going to have the same timecode. So when you get it into Resolve, you highlight the clicks you want to sync up, right click, sync with timecode, and there's 0 processing time. It is just instantly all in sync because it just matches up the time codes and shifts the clips and stuff. So
that, how does that all connect in with the camera?
Right. So there's multiple ways because this is not camera specific. So he said that I have to get a specific cable for my Canon R5C, which is this little mini lock thing that goes, because the R5C's got a timecode port specifically for it. But for example, on your Fujis or other mirrorless cameras, you get this. You get a 3.5mm to 3.5mm cable. See if we can get that in focus. There we go.
Yeah.
It goes into the microphone port, and so it will record scratch audio on the right channel, and I think it will then record a audio timecode file on the left channel. And Premiere doesn't support this, and I don't think Final Cut does, but Resolve does. And Resolve, you can then convert the audio on that track to timecode, and then sync how I was previously saying.
Wow.
So it's really cool.
How does it work? Does it then fit in line with your mic if you're plugging it into your mic?
Yeah, so obviously you got two channels. You got left and right on the audio channels. So it puts the time code on the left.
The actual little boxes that you've got, what ports do they have then?
It has just a 3.5mm locking port out.
Right. Okay.
So you just have to, it comes in a box with all the cables you'd need, really. You'd probably, if you're using two mirrorlesses without a timecode port, you'll need to get another one of these little 3.5mm cables. But it's a really neat little bit of kit, and the coolest thing is you turn them all on and you sync it. It's all done through your phone, so you then sync all the units up via your phone, and then they all blink in time, and then all the time codes synced and in time. And you might be listening to it going, "Oh, why do I need an external time code? Is the time code in the camera not good enough?" No, simply it might be good, but the clocks in the cameras aren't as accurate as the clocks that are in the Deity, what's the other one? The Tentacle Sync, and there's loads of other timecode systems, but I've just bought into the Deity one, and it's a really, really neat bit of kit. And the nice thing about these units is that they say there is I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think they say there's less than a 1 frame drift in 72 hours of it running.
Wow.
So
but I'm still confused. If you've got that plugged into your 3.5mm mic jack, how do you then plug your mic in?
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Well, you can either use a new Canon, or I think Fuji have it as well with the clever hot shoe, with the smart hot shoe. Then you get XLRs out, or you can get a splitter. And then,
so if you had like one of the Tashcam things that go into your hot shoe, you could run that. Would have a time code input into it, would it?
No, but it would then not. It would not need the headphone port on the side of the camera.
Yeah.
So
the only thing with that is how you set that up with your cage for your camera.
They haven't
you've got
really
top panels and stuff.
Yeah, they haven't really thought that part of it through. I think when it's less for running gun stuff. Because really, how often do you really use the audio off your run and gun setup? And I think for a lot of people, I also would say the designs of these XLR top handles. I mean, I've previously owned the Sony one, which was good, but I felt that if it had been knocked, it would have probably snapped.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that is quite a vulnerable port, the hot shoe, the best of times.
Yeah, and also you've then got something that's 6 inches tall coming off the top of it. That if you're used to, I mean, I wear my cameras on my belts and stuff. If I'm used to walking through doorways, and then I suddenly have an extra 6 inches on top of it, I'm going to smash that off straight away. I can guarantee it.
Yeah.
But I
was kind of expecting camera brands to bring out cages that could incorporate that. Have a way for it to fit around and almost protect the hot shoe mount as well.
I'm fairly certain Small Rig did something like that. I think what would have been cooler is if the audio companies had gone, right, let's put it in a box format, and then put in some mounting screws, and then we can have it built off out to the side, and then run the cable into a little hot shoe, like almost like our old TTL cables. Run something like that. So have a smart hot shoe cable to then relocate the audio box. I'm sure that would have been useful for a lot of people.
What about, to go back to the little units, what are their mounting options on them? Do they have three-quarter threads on them?
Glad you asked. So they don't have three-quarter threads on them. What they have, ready? Bit of ASMR, AMCR, no ASMR.
Yeah.
Anyway, audio stuff.
ASMR.
There we go. It has got a little bit of Velcro on the back. There you go, a little square of Velcro, and then they all come with Velcro hot shoe attachments.
Oh, sexy.
So you, and in the pack you also get some spare Velcro, so you can just attach that onto kind of wherever. So honestly, actually, really, really
Do you
nice.
wear like one of those Velcro suits when you film?
Only when I'm running at walls. Normally at fairgrounds.
Do you remember that used to be a thing?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Like, I haven't seen that for years, but when we were kids, you used to occasionally go to some kind of like park fete, and there'd be somebody set up with one of these things where you would bounce off a trampoline wearing a Velcro suit and stick to a wall. Why is that not still a thing?
I don't know. Just maybe there was like a horrific incident of someone being stuck on the wall overnight, and just
it couldn't free them.
And it was I don't know. Yeah. It was an odd one. I never did it. I was
a nightmare packing the suits away, wouldn't it? Like they just get stuck to everything. Anyway, shall I show you what I got?
Yes. Is this show you what you got? That obviously you haven't bought anything.
So, I got a new Asun iPad cage.
Look at that.
This is their Mark II. I bought it with the idea of actually, I justified it thinking I would use it for this show, actually, to be able to have run my iPad as a monitor that I could kind of leave set up. However, the fatal flaw in this, and the kind of issue with the cage itself, is there's a bit of a bugger to put on. Like, you've got to basically unscrew loads of these little screws, and then it kind of loosens. I'm not sure if you can see that there. It loosens it enough, but you then need to kind of like pull the whole thing apart in a way enough to be able to then fit the iPad in. And unfortunately, it doesn't offer, like, it offers protection around the side, and they've got little things like hot shoe mounts, and 3/4 threads and what have you. But what would have been better is if they'd actually made the entire rim a NATO rail.
Is it not NATO on the side?
No, which is a bit odd. So what I've done is I've attached a little NATO rail there and on the other side, so I can actually put side handles on.
For people who don't know, do you want to quickly explain what a NATO rail is?
So a NATO rail is a form of attachment that you use a lot in video rigging. It's kind of like these ones have got fail-safes on them, so that if you had a handle attached and it actually is loose, then it shouldn't slide off the end. Mm-hmm. Like these little bits press in. I'm not sure if you can see that.
I think, bizarrely, NATO rail actually came from the military. And I'm fairly certain it was a way of attaching...
Does the name give it away?
Well, yeah, maybe. Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was mainly a way of attaching things to weapons.
Yes, quite possibly.
I think they were also called tin rails, but I might be wrong on that.
The other thing I've done is I've attached little Peak Design anchors on, so you can actually put a strap on it. And the whole idea of it is you can fit a Sony mount battery in the back, and run your iPad off of it. This kind of folds out. So the other justification I had for it is when I have an Asun Cineview 2, which I can attach to my camera to kind of have an output for the kind of video, and that somebody can monitor it then on that using their app. So the idea of using that iPad as kind of a monitor on set sometimes. But yeah, so it's frustrating because it's a Mark II and it's slightly better than the Mark 1, but there are a few things that I just feel like, why didn't you incorporate this?
Have you fed that back to them?
No, maybe I should.
See, here's the thing.
I mean, I feel like we should just kind of be employed by some of these brands to be like real world opinion.
Hey,
this is what you need.
If any of these brands are listening and do want to get us involved in product development, I've done it for a few companies, and I'd be very happy to do it again. You will get the most honest opinion. You might not like it, but yeah, you will get an honest opinion.
Yeah.
But I do often wonder.
Anyway,
I don't know. I do often wonder how how much real world, or how, these products, when they're developed, how many actual photographers or how many videographers actually get to use them and properly feedback. Because I do worry that there's like a group of people, and I'm not attacking anyone, obviously, but I do worry that there might be people who are so pumped to be involved, or that they're getting stuff for free, that they then won't feedback honestly. Because I buy some products and I'm like, no, surely this hasn't been developed this way, because obviously it falls apart, or it breaks, or you can't slip the iPad in and out easily, or there's so many things that we use day to day that I feel like are a great idea, but they're just slightly wide of the mark.
Yeah, I don't know. Asun, if you're listening, give us a bell.
And Asun, if you're listening, me and my whole Digi team, we use your CineView HE and SE RX-TX wireless transmitters, and we absolutely love them. So they're great.
You're doing some things right.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And if anyone is, actually, that's an interesting point, because I think a lot of people in lockdown were invested in the Hollyland stuff. I bought some of the Hollyland stuff as well. The Asun CineView HE wireless TX RX that I now use has been...
It's a mouthful.
Isn't it? Yeah, catchy name. But it's been honestly absolutely flawless since we started using it. So I am a very happy chappy. But we did not mean to spend 16 minutes talking about kit. We have an FAQ episode. So this is just me and Greg talking, and we have, hundreds. We actually, not hundreds. We did very well. We got a lot of questions. So I think we should do our best to try and, we could make 3 episodes out of this minimum. So I think we should try and get through them.
Yeah. So we've had 2 questions that come in about money. Show me the money. Talking about money. Talking about quotes. How do you go about quoting for a new client? Day rates, value-based usage, or whether or not we mix it all together. Now, we've talked about this before on the show, and it is always an area that's kind of very individual at the end of the day. So it's kind of hard to kind of necessarily use actual figures. However, and we had this, I think, on the Bill Kramer episode, we mentioned this. There's one really good resource for US examples, which is on the A Photo Editor website. Bill Oppenheimer's estimates that he puts together for Wonderful Machine. They're really useful to see, because he actually talks through how the estimates are put together, why things are itemized in certain ways, and why they do that from a strategic point of view in case the goalposts change, because that's quite an important thing when you're putting an estimate together, is to understand what the client might come back with, what they might want to change. And if you've kind of positioned yourself in a place where you've put the cost all in one area that they then say they no longer want, your quote suddenly goes down to being not that useful financially for yourself. And I think the basis for all of this is sitting down and doing your cost of doing business. And it's something which people are always really reluctant to actually sit down and do for some reason. But it is definitely worth doing. I think it's generally because people don't like thinking about money. We're most of us aren't doing it for the money. We're doing it because we have a love for the creative side of it. And the thought of money side of things makes a lot of people feel anxiety. But, the kind of unfortunate reality is that unless you're able to make it work financially, then, you're not going to continue to work in this industry. So you need to kind of be able to think about the money side of things unemotionally, I guess. So doing your cost of doing business, I was having a quick research earlier just to see, it's very simple just to literally Google cost of doing business photographers, and there's loads of sites that come up and resources that come up. There was one guy actually, Andrew Miller, and we will link in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, it will be in the comments below to this. It's a British wedding photographer that's put a blog post on about this, and he actually has a link to a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that he uses to calculate his cost of doing business.
Now, for any of those you listening who don't know what a cost of doing business is, it's basically where you work out what you need to be making a year in order to break even and to not be operating at a loss. So you need to figure out what your ideal target income is. You then need to look at whether or not you've got other income coming in, say from part-time jobs, etc., or from different areas of photography, and then work out how many days realistically you're actually going to be working in a year. And if you can't work it out over a year, then try and think, well, actually, realistically, how many times a week am I shooting? People, what I often find is people cost their day rates at a level where you think, well, that would be fine if you're shooting every single day, but you're not, and you're not necessarily with photographers. When you look at kind of the film industry, you get people working on day rates, but quite often they'll be on a 3, 4, 5 day shoot at a minimum. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll be working weeks. But with photographers, it's, you might be on like one shoot a week, one shoot every 2 weeks. If you're doing advertising, you might be doing one shoot a month, in terms of actually what you're billing for. You'll be doing other stuff around, you might be doing editorial, but if you're talking about commercial day rates, then you need to be thinking about realistically how many of those are you actually going to be doing in a week, in a month, in a year. Mm-hmm. Once you have that, you also then need to take into account your business expenses. So that's everything from like your insurance to your subscriptions to your internet provider to your, the bills that you have for running your business from electricity, from everything. And then what you're actually spending on kit every year or every month or every week. Once you've got your kind of expenses and you work out your annual expenses, then you've got basically an idea of how much is going out. You've got an idea of how much you actually want to be making. And from that, you can start to calculate how much you should be charging. So that's
very well said. Very well said. Very well said.
In a nutshell. So that is something to always be thinking about. And I also think that a lot of photographers need to be thinking about kind of the way that they put their estimates together. And again, go back to the Bill Kramer episode that we did earlier this season, because he talks through a lot of this. But the idea of thinking about your day rate and whether or not you want to lump everything together or whether or not you want to put in extra elements that can be removed or added depending on whether or not the client changes their mind on certain things. And I personally find it's quite useful to have that, to have items itemized so the client can see exactly what they're paying for. And sometimes to have items put in with no cost next to them because the client hasn't opted for them. But at a later date, they might turn around and say, well, actually, I do want hair and makeup, for example. And you can say, well, in the estimate, it was there, but there was an NA next to it because we hadn't got anybody booked and you hadn't wanted anyone. Mm-hmm. But now there is a cost because it's there. And I showed that I could provide it, but you didn't want it. And now you do want it. So therefore, you have to understand that there's an added cost to that. Yep. Whereas if you just do a lump sum for your the job's going to be this much, and then somebody makes changes, they don't understand how that's affecting the cost. So if you can show people and be transparent with your cost to some degree, then that makes people understand the reality of what's going into it. And I also think sometimes people are a bit shy to charge what they need to be charging. But I think coming back to doing the cost of doing business, if you can do that calculation for yourself, it becomes easier to justify asking for what you need to be asking for to actually make a living. Mm-hmm. Because if you're ever asked, you can explain, well, my camera insurance costs X amount a year. My equipment that I'm buying, I'm actually spending this amount a year just on buying hard drives and new computers and new software. You start to understand the amount of expenses that are involved in being a working photographer, and actually why that
have you ever been
leads
asked
to day rates.
To justify your costs?
I must have been in the.
Do you know what? It's funny.
Doing it nearly 20 years.
I don't think I've ever had it. I don't think in my 20 years of doing it.
I think I've had people say, maybe not justify the cost, but sometimes people will say,
"Oof, that's expensive.
Oh, that's coming in a bit. That's coming in more than we're finding elsewhere." Mm-hmm. And at that point, I'll say, "Okay, that's fine, but I'm bringing this to the table. I'm bringing that to the table. I'm bringing X to the table." And it's entirely up to you. It's your choice. It's your budget. It's your money.
That's really interesting, though, because you do what I do. We go back and just say that very well might be the case. If you're getting cheaper cheaper quotes elsewhere, that's fine. But you don't instantly go to, I'll match that. Go to, well, this is the added value that I bring. You know, I do a lot of interviews and stuff, you know, hence the time code stuff. And I'm sure I probably come in a little bit more expensive than video crews, but the reason I can justify it is I say I bring this, and this to the table, and they go, yeah, completely understandable. You bring that personal touch or whatever it is that you bring. So I think it's really good to argue the strengths and the benefits you bring rather than instantly go and try and reduce your costs.
Yeah, I think that's wise. You've got to have a sense of understand. This is, again, back to the cost of doing business. When you understand what it costs to be a professional photographer and what it costs to run your business, you're going to be far more likely to take it seriously, take what you're doing seriously. I think the creative industry as a whole suffers from this quite a lot, in that people don't like talking about money and they don't like putting a value on what they do because most people have a sense of imposter syndrome. You know, see episode, whatever it was, with Lucy Locke, who very openly talked about imposter syndrome and the dangers of it, because, you know, it can make us undersell what we do. And actually, you know, if you're being sought out by somebody to do work for them, it's because they've seen what you do. Well, hopefully it's because they've seen what you do and like it and are willing to pay for it. So it's about, you know, doing those calculations, having a bit of confidence in yourself, having a bit of confidence that what you're doing is worth money and understanding why it's worth money. And then you can start to get better at doing estimates. But in terms of resources, as I said, look in the show notes, look in the comments below, and we'll link to the elements I spoke about, and hopefully they will help people start to do their own calculations. You know, but think about itemizing items. You know, if you're using a lot of kit, if you're using a lot of lighting kit on a job, you should be renting some of that back to the client, because if it's not necessarily kit that everyone's going to have, then anyone else that was doing that job would have had to have rented that in. You don't have to be making huge markups on that at all, but you're going to be making some element of money from the fact that you've invested in that kit. At the end of the day, you've invested your own money in that kit, and it should be paying you back in some way, not just allowing you to do your job.
I think one of the things, especially with kit, I mean, everyone probably knows how much kit I own, and you know, and I do bring it out on every job, and I do always rent it out. But the way I do it is I do market minus 20. So I just kind of go, okay, well, what's the market cost of hiring out that Aperture 600C, for example? I go to Direct or Wex or Fixation or ProLight or whoever, you know, has the thing. I say, okay, I can see they're putting it out for 100 or whatever it is a day. Well, I'll then put it out on my quote at 80. I'm more than happy with that. But if they come back and say, oh, you know, why are we paying you for your kit? I say, well, actually, you're getting a really good deal on it, because it's I run a hire company, if you will, and it's my choice to bring my kit out, because that's, you know, it's stuff that I own personally. Well, not personally, it's all...
Because you're then paying insurance.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Because you've got crew moving it around, you're potentially going to be devaluing your kit because it's going to be getting damaged.
Yeah, of course. But I go back to the client and I just say, look, you know, this is how much it costs if you're getting it from a hire house. So that is the absolute minimum you will spend, unless you agree that, you know, you're all right with me bringing my kit out. And because I do it market minus 20. And they go, actually, that's a great deal. Thanks very much for explaining it. And so I've found that since I've started doing it that way and explaining it that way, that clients have been very happy for me to use my own kit and for me to charge accordingly, because they're still getting a saving. And I'm very happy with the, you know, almost getting what a hire house would get.
They're also getting quality kit, because it's not like you're turning up with, you know, your budget flash gun.
No, they're getting quality kit.
And not to say there's anything wrong with that, but ultimately, like, if you're investing a lot of money in your kit, then you need to be making it worthwhile. But you're also, you know, bringing along good kit to use for the client's work.
Do you know the nice thing I always like? For example, I use a lot of the Aperture lighting, right? And so I can bring out all of my stuff, which is almost new. Me and my team, we really look after the kit. So when we pull it out on the set, it looks really, really good nick. Whereas I've hired stuff in the past and it's been dented about, knocked about, the Bluetooth won't reset, all sorts of stuff. So at the beginning of the day when you get all this stuff set up, you have to spend all that time resetting all the Bluetooth and then linking it into the Sidus link and all that sort of stuff. Whereas I'm like, actually, no, it's because it's all my kit. I know exactly where it was on the last job, who uses it, how it's been treated. The Bluetooth is already all paired up to my phone. And I know not everyone can always use their own kit, and some people deliberately choose not to, and I totally respect that. But as I live slightly out of town, so for me to end up hiring ends up putting an extra half day to collect and deliver the stuff back on. Or pay the hire charge, the delivery charges with the hire company. But for me, I much prefer using my own kit, and the client's very happy to pay for it.
Another thing to go back to estimates, it's worth considering. For example, if you're doing headshots, you should be thinking about charging the post-production per image rather than on a job basis. We've all been in situations where, and digital capture as well, we've all been on situations where you've turned up on a job and then suddenly the goalposts have changed last minute. And if you have already put in an estimate where you've showed your workings out and you've done it on a per person basis, that when they say, actually, there's 5 more people that we're trying to fit into the schedule, okay, that's fine, but that incurs a cost, because ultimately you've suddenly got extra work that's going to take you longer in post-production, take up more digital storage, take up more time on the day. And if you're in a position where you've priced yourself where you can't expand to take that, then you've done yourself a disservice. So it's worth thinking about worth thinking about trying to mitigate the risk of anything changing and you being the one who has to take the hit. Ultimately, it's not being sneaky or anything like that. You're just being fully transparent with the client and saying everything has a cost. And if you don't want that, that's fine. We take it out, but everything has a cost. It doesn't mean that you price yourself out of the situation. You just are sensible, and it allows you to have longevity within the industry, because if you keep making mistakes like that and keep being kind of taking the hit yourself, eventually you'll get out of business.
For sure. When I first signed with an agent ages ago, I was in a meeting and the client had said something like, "Oh, can you do this?" And I just gone, "Oh yeah, of course, absolutely, I'll bring that along." And I kind of got a bit of a nudge under the table, and they were like, "Yeah, of course we can do that. That won't be a problem, but there will be an added cost associated with it." And I realised, I was just like, "Oh, that's how you do it. That's how it is professionally done." To say absolutely, because the answer to can you do it should always be yes, and then you figure it out afterwards. But you then just make sure that you just completely going back and just being completely transparent and just say yes, absolutely we can do, but there will be an associated cost with it, and the client's expecting that.
A good way of looking at it. A good way of looking at it is if you say you've got a plumber around to look at your boiler, and you'd be like, right, well, I paid him to come round and look at the boiler, but when he's there, you're like, actually, the radiator upstairs broken, and I've got a leak on the, in the bathroom tap. Would you mind just having a look at that? I very much doubt any plumber would be like, oh yeah, absolutely, that's and spend an extra hour on that and then not charge you for it. Ultimately, time is money for them, and everything is done with a cost, and it needs to be the same for a photographer. And I've seen it time and time again where a client at the last minute will make a change, and I mean, I've never had a problem pushback with quite openly turning around and saying absolutely we can make that work, but there obviously is an implication that there will be a cost in that. And if someone says, oh okay, that makes them think about it twice, but it also makes them respect you more, because they understand that you are a professional, doing it professionally.
100%.
So hopefully that's... Do you think that's answered the question?
So. Yeah, probably a couple of times over. But I just think, full transparency.
I mean, it is the type of thing that, honestly, we will keep going back to it, I'm sure. And we're always aiming to bring people on to the pod that can talk about this stuff, because I know it's one of the areas that people do find the most difficult. And it is hard sometimes to find the information out there.
I know it doesn't sound like super exciting, but do you think we should get an accountant on?
We have been looking. I have been looking. It is a bit. So far, I found it a bit tricky to find an accountant to come on that is going to be dynamic and exciting. Nothing against accountants, but if you guys have got any recommendations, if you've got an accountant that you've worked with, you think, or a firm that's kind of specialises in photographers that you think actually are worth talking to, and that want some free advertising, because they'll probably get quite a few sign-ups from it, then please get
I should
in touch.
also say, if mine and yours accountants are listening, we've just discounted you guys, not because of your personality, but because we don't want people knowing who our accountants are. So that's it's nothing against you, Ryan. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Right,
Well, your accountant is based in Panama.
100%. Should we quickly move on to the next question before I dig myself a bigger hole with my accountant?
So we've got somebody's asked how I've got on with my Fuji move. I have to say it's kind of it's not stalled. I'm just in a position where I'm straddling two horses. I haven't fully left Canon, and I haven't fully moved to Fuji. I'm still very much in a place where I'm filming on a Fuji camera right now. I have 3 Fuji cameras. I have one, the XH2S, which is filming now, which is what I use in a whole cage setup with matte box and everything for filming. And then I have 2 of the XH2s, which are basically the exact same body but slightly larger image sensor, or more megapixels, should I say, that I use for more kind of travel assignments and assignments where I need to be relatively light. Because as much as I love the Canon, the glass on those things is just big for travelling.
Yeah, it's vast.
Big
Absolutely.
lenses.
I mean, silly question though. That's those 3 cameras. That covers most. Why are you still using the Canon?
I still use the Canon for certain jobs where, because the R5 has got more megapixels generally than the XH2s. It's full frame, whereas the XH2s aren't. And so for portrait work, things like that in the studio, I generally want the higher resolution, but I don't want to be going to the level of having a Fuji GFX 100 just yet, because I don't want to be dealing with massive files, because I don't need them. And you know, I've photographers that I share a studio with have got that camera and love it, but equally have then gone, oh, my computer can't handle it, I've got to upgrade my computer.
Yeah.
Oh, my hard drives are full up, I need to upgrade my hard drives. And suddenly there's all these extra costs of having that. So, you know, I've held off for the time being. I've also held off because there's a few things with that camera that I like, and there's a few things I think they can improve. So I'm waiting to see kind of the versions down the line as to whether or not I fully move over from Canon. So for me, the Canons I prefer shooting when I use Studio Flash, any kind of flash work, I prefer using the Canons. It's just a kind of matter of choice rather than anything really specific that I can dig down into. The Fujis I love, but I just find that sometimes the menu system is a bit backwards.
That's fair enough.
And can be a bit of a pain. And I've shot with Canon for 15 plus years, so I get on with it super easily.
Speaking about the R5, have you seen the new Rumor? Well, by the time this goes out, it won't be a new rumour. It'll be probably a long-established rumour. But they by the looks of it, are not going to release the R5 II this year. It looks like the R5 II is going to come in 2024, but the R5, and probably not the R5C, but hopefully the R5C, is going to get a huge firmware update to bring in some new features to it, rather than, so you effectively will hopefully feel like you're getting a new camera for free. So that's quite nice.
Do you know what those new features might be? Oh.
No, if I'm honest, I think there's going to be 3D box possibly on the autofocus. So I think for wildlife people and people who need 3D boxes, I've never needed a 3D box, but if you're shooting within a range of distances, I could see why that would be a benefit. I think they're going to try and get rid of the 30-minute video limit, and yeah, a few other things. But to be honest, there's a list. If you go to Canon Rumors and have a look, I think it's the most read story, and yeah, it does look good.
Okay, well, we'll move on. We've got a question here again on to do with kit. Was basically somebody wanting us to talk about light strobes and quality of light. I think they meant it as a topic rather than a question, because there's no real question to it. I think what they're trying to get at is the idea of whether or not we think there is much importance in the idea of quality of light, whether or not there's much difference in, say, a budget. I don't know if I should name a brand.
Probably not, but just say budget.
Maybe a brand beginning with G and ending in X versus a Profoto head. Tom, I'm going to pass this on to you.
Full disclosure, I am quite closely linked with Profoto here in the UK and do various live shows with them at things like the photography show and things like that. I always like the higher end stuff, regardless of brand, because it tends to be, and I know there's going to be people who say, oh, you're wrong, but it tends to be more reliable and more consistent. And that for me is the two things really, because I think light coming out, just to the physics of light is light, right? But one flash, if it is different from the other in both output and color temperature, will make our life a nightmare. But what I'm paying for in the high end stuff, and full disclosure, I do buy all my kit. I am not given any kit. I do buy it all. But the thing for me is that I know frame 1 will be the same exposure as frame 10. So what I'm concentrating on is not, the exposure of the light or anything like that. I am only focused on what the subject is doing in the frame. And that for me just takes away a whole load of the worry about it. And I know these cheaper brands, they're getting really good. And they're getting more widely adopted. And as they get more widely adopted, the companies will have more money for R&D, and it'll be really interesting to see what they get up to. But currently, for me, I just think from an output consistency and a power point of view, that is why I use the more expensive stuff.
I think, they are getting a lot better, and that is good. It must be quite frustrating to be an established light brand and to see your designs basically being ripped off. And I know that, what do they always say, kind of, what's the term about people copying you?
Is it the highest form of flattery? Imitation's the highest form of flattery?
Yes, something like that. Yes. But, I mean, fuck that. I mean, that's quite annoying if it's your business, isn't it? But at the same time, they are, as you said, they are getting very good, and they offer good opportunities to people that don't necessarily have the budgets for Profoto kit. And I think that's great. Like, at the end of the day, like, I have had all sorts of flashes over the years, and I have still got like cheap lighting equipment in my kit because it's worth having as a backup, and I started with it and it served me well.
I started on Bowens lights.
At the end of the day,
without being funny, if I hadn't bought the cheap stuff, I wouldn't have understood, or I wouldn't have been able to establish myself enough to buy the more expensive stuff. So I think
and it's a real mix, like the Elinchroms offer cheap heads, but that's not to say that they don't offer also more adaptable, versatile, and more expensive head and lighting kits. And their modifiers, personally, I still use over other more expensive brands, because the Rotolux system that they have, I absolutely love. I think it's great, and no one else has seemed to have kind of nailed that.
I know a lot of people who are using the Rotoluxes, especially the Deep 100 and the 135, and they're really popular. But Elinchrom, seeing as you're listening, please, what is with your locking system for your speed rings? It's got to be that it's the worst design, isn't it?
It's awful. Yeah.
I used one.
It's one of those things, though, that there's too much stuff out there now for them to probably want to change it. But it is, after having used them for years, I still put a modifier on a light and go, is it locked? Is it locked? There's only one way of finding out. Wiggle, falls off.
In the early days of my career, I was going into a studio during a music shoot, and it was one of those junket days where different photographers, the band would stay in the studio and the different photographers would come through and stuff. And the photographer who was in before me, who's like one of the, he used to be Kerrang's main guy, a great guy called Paul Harries, really good photographer. I used to really look up to him in the earlier days of my career and stuff. I still do now, Paul, if you're listening. But he had got in at Hoban, he'd got in some Electron packs and heads, and it totally did not make sense for me, because at the time I was using Bowens, obviously you push it down, lock it, and then you can hear it lock, and then it's, you have to full on, then the put it in, and then the jiggle, and then the twist, and then the jiggle again, and then you pull it up, and the whole thing comes away in your hands, and you're like, what is that? So I've only used it once, but I know how bad it was.
Yeah.
So Electron, please get it sorted out.
Yeah. So next question is color grading, commercial picks, and color grading management, if it differs from VSCO crushed Instapix. I think they're talking about kind of color trends with color grading, which from what I've seen seem to be emulating still the kind of move. Tends to be the fashion world dominates the look, and then that look filters into commercial work. Fashion tends to lead the way. And so you look back 5 years at where fashion was, and it was all kind of Jamie Hawksworth, colour, film photography. He developed, his way of processing in the lab, and that has been emulated again and again and again. And you see it being emulated still, like the colour handprint look in commercial work is quite popular. I think when VSCO as a company changed to be a social platform was in some ways quite a shame, because the stuff that they were developing for Lightroom was actually really good in my opinion. And there seems to be, as far as I'm concerned, quite a big gap in the market when it comes to decent providers for styles in Capture One and in Lightroom, if I'm honest. Now, I mean, there's a flood of stuff for Lightroom. There's so much stuff out there for Lightroom, but it's of vast varying degrees of quality.
I think it is improving for Capture.
Whereas VSCO had
I think it is getting better for Capture, but I mean, Lightroom basically led the charge, and all the influencers and stuff, they all have their own preset packs for Lightroom and stuff like that. And just Capture One were late to the game, I think, on it. So, I think people are now getting better now, especially as people are now using ICC profiles to do the base of their stuff, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, it's getting better, but yeah, room for improvement. Especially what I will say is also a lot of, if you shoot nice, natural light, bright stuff, the world is your oyster as far as all of that stuff goes. You've got a million different things you can choose. However, if you shoot flash and slightly dark, you are so limited with regards to what presets look good. And obviously you do your own thing, but I've never been able to find anything that I think suits me or my work. So that's why I just build everything by hand now.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. The next one. Does having a studio help your brand as a photographer, or is it a cost that's not needed?
I would love to jump in on this, because I had a studio. I do not have a studio. You have a studio, but don't really use your studio. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of like a fair...
So the reason for me, though, at the moment of not using a studio, and it actually kind of leads into the next question, which was, how do you guys deal with planning work shoots around having a new baby? The reason I'm not using the studio much at the moment is I'm having to be around at home to help with childcare. There was not to go off topic on onto that second question too much, but there was a thing in the news today about childcare. The average childcare cost of having a child under 2 in full-time nursery care is 15 grand a year. Now, I have 2 kids, so suddenly you're putting out 30 grand a year just to be able to send your children off to be looked after so that you can go to work. Now that is like, and again, this goes back to even further earlier in the episode about cost of doing business. That's a thing that I have to take, into mind when I'm bidding on jobs and going for jobs, is the fact that I've got more expenses than some people at the moment because of that. So it is difficult, because don't get me started on the politics and the government in this country and how much of a screwed up sense of, how much does a Tory government fully understand what working people are actually going through when, surely you all have a nanny. Fucking hell. Like, there are so many other countries in Western Europe, especially the Scandinavian countries, that have a much better way of looking at childcare, and are much fairer for women as well. We've had this, discussion with the last couple of episodes with Sophia and Sophie. So yes, that's a whole nother rant. But to go back to the studio, I'd say I don't know if it really helps your brand. I don't think it's something that is needed. No. I use it, and I was using it a lot more regularly. I was going there to work, and for me, it was about having separation and treating work in a different way than working from home. Now, I worked from home for 7 years before I had a studio, and I've had a studio for nearly 10 years. And when I started working in a studio, I would go to work and treat it as an actual job. So I would come home and I would get a request from a client like, oh, can we have this like tonight? And I would have to turn around and say, I'm sorry, but I'm back in the studio tomorrow, as you're back in the office tomorrow at this time. I would do it then. And it took a while, but there was a certain level of kind of like understanding that suddenly people were going, oh, okay, I can't just be calling you at all hours of the night and day and expecting you to do something without it costing. Again, going back to that, I can go into the studio now, but it's going to be overtime. Like, you should have let me know, when in working hours, if that was something that was required. So I think it allows you to treat the job as a job rather than something that can become dangerously all-absorbing. And that does become quite important when you have a family as well, because are you going to be slinking off to do work in the office when actually you need to be around with the kids? All of these things, it can really change the way you think about your working hours. From a point of whether or not it affects your brand, I don't think it does, and whether or not it's a cost that's needed is something that you can only... My studio happens to be very affordable, but I share it with 5 other photographers, which is why it's affordable. And for me, that cost, if that was much more, then it probably wouldn't be worth having a studio at the moment, because I don't use it that much. But occasionally I do use it for shoots, I use it for tests, and that then gets me commercial jobs. I had a pitch the other week that I had to do some tests in the studio for, in order to actually be able to put them in the pitch, and I can go in and do that. So it is helpful for that. But again, it totally depends on your type of photography. If you're a still life photographer, having a studio is super important, or at least helpful, because it means that you can be working all the time in there. But if you're doing stuff like me, which is a mix between lifestyle and travel, then the studio is more of a desk space. The other aspect of it that is super helpful for me is the social side of it, because I go in and I've got 5 other photographers that I can talk to, and I can moan about things to, rather than just to Tom.
Is there a problem with that, Greg?
On this podcast, and I can run through. I can run through, scenarios that have come in, and have you ever had this happen? Have you ever worked with this person? Have you ever done that? And I can have that social side, which can quite often be lacking for a lot of photographers, because it is a very solitary profession.
That's why we started the podcast, wasn't it? To try and kind of have a little bit of community and have these chats. I mean, me and you personally started it because we started it in lockdown and not much was going on. So,
sometimes Tom just calls in on the studio and I just leave him open in the corner on the laptop, and he sits there like a seventh member of the studio.
Hey, I did say, look, can I come and join the studio? And you said no. And I thought that was very harsh. You didn't give me a reason.
Too much time. It was after talking to your wife.
She very sensibly said no. But the going back to the studio thing, I ran a studio for 8 years. I had a lot of people come down to me. It was very early on in my career, and I never charged people when we shot in there and stuff like that. I mean, charged people for my time, but never for the studio. So it was always good because people liked the cost saving and stuff like that, right? But the costs of running these places, people always seem to forget. We had a leak come through, and obviously the roof wasn't our responsibility; it was the landlord's, but it damaged all the equipment. So we then had to deal with the hassle of all of that and stuff like that. And we had to paint the studio all the time. And, it was, from a maintenance point of view, it was a bit of a nightmare. But for me, I'm actually looking at getting a space now, quite local to me, just to have a creative space. And same for you, right? To have that breakwater between home and the job. Because at the minute, my office is at home, and I am forever at work. And so, you know, I'll be working till sometimes 3 a.m. And actually, I want to do like a normal work day, because I also want focus. If I'm going to the office from 9 till 5, I know that I have got from 9 till 5 to work as hard as I possibly can, because as soon as I'm out of the door at 5, I can leave it behind. And actually, I think from a mental health point of view, I think that would really benefit me, because at the minute I am just working all the time, and it's kind of been quiet. So what have I been working on? Like I don't know if you're the same, but as photographers, I think we can forever find tasks for us to do. And they're always tasks. My to-do list seems to, even when I'm quiet, my to-do list seems to grow and grow and grow. And actually, I just think that maybe it should stop growing. I should just try and take everything a bit more easy, work normal hours, and just relax a bit. That's my plan anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully that answers the question. I think it's less important from a brand point of view, but it's important from other points of view that you might not necessarily have considered. But hopefully that will have answered the question. I'm rattling through these now.
You've answered the one about
prattling on
having a baby. Now I would just chuck in my 2 cents and just say, when I had my daughter, or when my wife had our daughter, I had planned to take some time off. So I was just like, I'm going to take some time off, and I'm going to be there for the family. So I took some time off, and I thought, I've been there for the family. And then I was just like, right, new year, let's go. I'm going to go. I'm going to get all these meetings. I am pumped. I am so excited for this year. I am good to what? COVID? Oh shit. So then suddenly I went back to work in mid-February, and then suddenly we got locked up in March. So I basically took effectively 4 months off, and then came back to no work for months on end. So my planning didn't really go that well. So I really wouldn't use me as an example. Speak to Greg more about that.
I think it's generally the difficult thing is, is, as the question says about planning work and shoots around having a new baby, it is difficult. It is difficult when you are then away for work and leaving your partner, having to deal with all of it by themselves. Some people are in a fortunate position where they live near family or help or whatever, but not everyone has that. So that is something to take on board. The reality is you have less time to yourself. We have, you've got to be there for your family, and that has to take priority. And some people are going to understand that, and some people aren't. I had a shoot the other day that I had to cancel very last minute because my daughter had to go into hospital for emergency surgery, and she's like 6 months old. Like, I'm sorry, but that shoot is being cancelled. I'm 100% need to be there.
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
And some people are going to be like, yeah, totally get it, absolutely. And some people, and unfortunately in this case they were. But I'm sure you'll equally get other people being like, oh, that's annoying. And you're like, well, I'm sorry, but it's not even a choice. So yeah, it is something that totally changes your priorities, and there's, it does change the dynamic. I do look back and think, God, what did I do with all my spare time?
You created tasks for that ever-growing to-do list.
Why wasn't I? Yes. And, to be fair, I did quite a lot, but equally, what I would give to have the freedom that I had pre-kids to be able to just go off and say, you know what, I actually want to spend 3 weeks travelling in this location and shooting some personal work. I cannot do that at the moment. Hopefully in the future I will get back to a point where that would be possible, but right now for the next year or so that's going to be very difficult for me to justify.
It'll happen. Yeah. Don't worry.
It's a shame, but it is what it is.
It'll happen.
It is what it is. Should we do one more question, and then we will possibly save the rest of the questions and put them in our next FAQ episode, because we are going to be doing these relatively, probably every 2 or 3 guests, we will go back to them because they do seem quite popular from our viewing figures. These are the ones that get a lot of listens. God knows why. I think if we do one more.
Also, I should say, if you want questions answered on the show, email them, Instagram us, or drop us a comment on YouTube now, or there's if you are listening on Spotify, for example, there is now a Q&A section under every episode. So send us your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them.
Yeah. So the final question I wanted to ask was, is social media still... Well, actually, should we do this one or should we do the AI one?
So
what do you want to do?
Talking about AI. Let's do...
but it's a good rant to finish on.
Let's do them both then. Let's do the... Is social media still worth it? No. Let's go on to the next one about AI. Right, so I'm having a really tough time... No, I'm having a really tough time with my social media because I posted up a lovely picture of Mate Rimac, the guy who runs the Rimac automobile, CEO of Bugatti Rimac, big name in the motor industry. And after 3 hours, it had 26 likes. And I was just like, do you know what? I'm done caring about Instagram and social media and stuff like that. I'll post, but honestly, the algorithms have now completely evaporated my enthusiasm for the medium. I have, however, started doing some reels, and I did a reel the other day, a video one of me just talking down the lens, and I quite enjoyed doing that. So, I might have to do more of them because apparently that's what the algorithm thinks, but I do enjoy it. So, but honestly,
I find that the experience of it is less fun for me now, actually going onto Instagram, and the amount of crap that you get shown that I have zero interest in. Some, I don't know, reel of somebody jumping out of bin and punching someone, and I'm like, why is this on my messages?
I actually sent you that one.
Piss off.
But I'm totally the same. For some reason, my feed is full of UFC knockouts. Like, I mean, I like watching a boxing match, sure, but I don't really like watching the whole ground and pound or whatever it's called, and I don't needs violence for the life of me. Yeah. And I clicked on one, and then obviously I've watched it, and now it's gone, oh, Tom really likes the UFC. I'm like, what? No. And then it started sending me, I really like watching American football, but for some reason it's sending me loads of basketball stuff, and I honestly, it's like someone else has logged into my profile because I don't know who. Well,
what do you want? It's
exactly. Is that the logic? I don't know. So, but my returns and my kind of influence on social media has dropped to the point where I just don't really see it being massively worth it. Honestly, I don't know if anyone else feels.
I know what you mean. I feel like there's some interesting things on the horizon. There's a new app that I have been kind of following the development of called Photo, which is with an F-O-T-O. I don't know if it's going to be any good, but they're pushing something out as to be basically a rival to Instagram that is very much focused on photographers, and to be about kind of getting back to where Instagram was kind of a bit earlier on in terms of being photo-centered and being able, allowing you to kind of post your images in different formats, but in a way that's still kind of interesting. Because that's the other thing with Instagram that I find very irritating, is the restriction sometimes is a good thing. It's a creative thing. It kind of, gives you a nice grid and whatever, but it's a bit boring after a while. Like, I want to get back to the days when I used to blog, and I would actually be excited about putting up an image story because I would be playing around with layouts and kind of putting, and I still do that to some point when I do these kind of Instagram carousels where I'll put all of the images from one story on like a 10 image carousel. But, is it the best medium for really absorbing images? No, not really. And then you're fighting with the algorithm that's saying video. It's a bit like, this is not what I signed up for. Like, this is not what I'm interested in seeing.
Do you think there's a load of fatigue?
So, yeah.
Like app fatigue. Like people are like, oh God, do I have to sign up and start again from fresh on another app? Like you say Photo, and I'm a bit like, oh
yes,
God, do I have to do it again?
Which is why I never signed up to TikTok, and people I talk to who are 10 years younger are like, you need to be on TikTok. And I'm like, I just don't want to be on TikTok. I've got no interest in another bloody app. Do you know what I mean? Like so, I do find it frustrating, but we're just too old men.
Speak for yourself.
So let's move on to something else that will bring us into a downer. AI. So we were asked, are you guys at all worried about AI art? Could it one day make photographers obsolete? And somebody else said, what do you think AI will affect the photography industry? And we've touched on this before briefly. I think personally, I am worried about it. I saw a magazine article the other day where they'd just decided to use AI to illustrate the article, because it was easier than commissioning someone to go and shoot pictures, or they thought it was probably easier than buying stock images. I think if I was an illustrator, I'd be more worried, because the amount you get paid to be an illustrator is not much to start with versus the amount of time it takes to do your work. And there is a whole kind of army of people now going, look at these images I created. And part of me is like, you haven't really created them in the old sense of the word. Yes, there is some argument to be had for understanding the way that the software works, understanding the prompts that you need to put in, understanding the kind of the way that you can train a machine to actually produce images. But even so, a lot of the AI art I've seen so far looks like AI art. It's got a certain look to it that you immediately go, oh, that's AI generated. And I know that will change. But I do think you have to think about who is going to pay for photography. Who are the people who are paying our bills, paying our salaries and commissioning us? And are they going to decide at some point that actually it's easier and cheaper to use AI and they get results that they are happy with? And I think long term, yes, to a degree, there will be a large section of the industry that does decide that. And that is, frankly, quite worrying. So what I think as photographers we need to be doing is understanding that, facing that as a reality, and trying to find other ways to supplement incomes and try and find other ways to make photography pay. And there are people already doing that with, whether or not you love them or hate them, NFTs, with print sales, with other forms. And obviously there will be, hopefully in the future, tech that helps creators make money in ways that we're not yet necessarily aware of. I think you have to be optimistic that as much as there is this tech that's going to make things easier to create AI art, which personally I have to look at and say I do find it exciting in places. Same. I do see some stuff and think that's cool, and I love the idea that you can have an idea and you can go and you can create a bunch of images. And for me, that's almost like a jumping off point. I can create a mood board, or I can create something that then inspires me further to do my own thing. And I think that is a way that it can be used that's proactive and helpful and positive. But I also think of course you're going to get people that are saying, well, this is a way of us saving money. We're just going to use AI. I've already seen magazine covers that have been entirely done in AI, and they've been excited because they said, this is all done by AI and it only took 20 seconds to create it. And you're thinking, well, yeah, you didn't pay a photographer, you didn't pay a makeup artist, you didn't pay a set designer, you didn't pay a studio fee. You haven't paid all of this stuff. And that is affecting, 5 people straight away there and taking them out of a job. So that is scary. It's not just photographers that are going to be affected by this, I think. And I also think that it won't be too long before it starts to creep into the video realm as well.
I mean, I would say it's already in the video realm in a lot of different areas. I've been shown a lot of technology that, I don't think it's quite as to the point where it is with photography currently. But the can I just temper, or not temper, but can I come back to, on the flip side of it, obviously I'm incredibly worried about it as well, but I would also say, I think it's going to get mired in some really horrible legal stuff, right? So currently you are already seeing Getty Images taking, I think, I don't want to talk about legal stuff, but Getty Images has currently got a legal case against one of the big AI generators, and that is currently, I think it's a $1.3 trillion lawsuit. Is that right?
Something. I saw something about this.
It's something monstrous. It's an absolutely huge thing. Then there's going to be new laws coming in. AI is struggling to gain copyright, and people are struggling to get copyright for AI generated imagery in the States, and I think it'll be the same in the UK. I know the government have just decided to abandon their they were going to give any AI generated imagery copyright straight away, but they've abandoned that, I think. So there's going to be a lot of things. Here's the thing, right? AI is here to stay. We can either embrace it and get on board, or we can suffer as a result. I would say that we have to embrace it and get him on board.
I mean, I've already had treatments sent to me that have used AI, and they've generated the images with AI, and it makes you think, well, it's not much of a further step for them to say. It's not that different to, say, being on set, and I've had this before, where, you know, an art director's whipped out their phone and taken a picture and gone, oh, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's the shot there. I've just taken it. And you've gone, okay. Yeah, but I set this all up and did the lighting, and I've got this. Anyway, never mind. But the point is, there's a danger that it could be just another thing that gets loaded onto already overloaded art directors who are told, you know what, come up with the idea, but then also generate it in AI. And to some people, they'll love that because it's kind of another creative outlet. And art directors are very creative people that sometimes don't get to do creative things as much as they'd like. So sure. I get that. But I do think that if it's being already used in treatments, then it's not too much further to them saying, well, we put a treatment together and we generated some AI art, and then we decided afterwards that actually the AI art was actually what we wanted, and we're not going to better it, so we're just going to use that.
I think from a human nature point of view, I think all of this AI and all the talk about generated art and stuff, I think people are also forgetting that a human can distinguish what is not real and what is real. And so when people, bluntly, we can harp on and on, and I firmly believe that AI is here to stay, right? But we can harp on and on about AI taking jobs, and I think in the short term it will. I think there's, as with anything, there's going to be a rush to adopt it, and then I think it's going to plateau, and then I think people are going to go, oh, God, actually, people aren't reacting to the advertising. People aren't buying the product.
I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think it's going to be a stage where people will always be able to tell the difference. I think AI will get so good that people won't be able to tell the difference, and that for me is a terrifying point.
Do you think?
Yeah, it's bound to. There's a danger then that people don't believe anything that they see, and obviously, you know, we're both in slightly different worlds within the photography world. I deal a lot more in the kind of non-fiction side of things, I guess, in terms of, you know, documentary stories and photography, and that there's a real danger in that world that, you know, people need to believe what they're seeing, and if we get to a point where people don't believe anything anymore, then what does that effect does that have on news and all sorts of things? I mean, you just have to look at what's going on in the world at the moment and how important, you know, one tweeted image can be to cancel an entire government or to cause change or whatever. Like, there's kind of, you know, the truth, what's the saying Churchill said, like the lie gets round the world in the time it takes to get the truth to get its trousers on, or something like that.
Yeah, before out of bed or something.
Yeah. So ultimately I do worry about AI's involvement in that, and I do think it's going to get dangerously to the point where we won't be able to tell what's AI and what's not. I think at the moment we can, but, you know, it's only going to get better.
Yeah, it's not the most positive thing to end the podcast on.
But I think the one positive takeaway, there's always going to be other ways, as I said, that we're not necessarily aware of, that we can use our skills and develop things and create stuff. Being creative is something that has many, many outlets, and we have to be creative about the way that we think about being creative, and then the way that we think about making money and making a living, you know. And at the moment we are in a system that has worked for a long time, but unfortunately that system is about to change radically, and we need to be aware of that. And as long as we're aware of that, then hopefully we can start to look for other ways that, you know, we can figure it all out.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Being a photographer, and I've quite often kind of said this in meetings with clients and stuff. Yes, I'm a photographer, but I think really first and foremost, I'm like a professional problem solver, because, you know, the photography is my creative outlet, like you said, but really I just love a problem to solve. This one's obviously quite a big problem to solve.
Yeah, go on then.
It's pretty big. AI, solve it. But there's always going to be a way around, or there's going to be a way through what is happening, and whether it is basically like an international mark of realism, or that people are, you know, that it wouldn't surprise me if it is made law that AI generated imagery has to be marked as such. And, you know, in the top left-hand corner or top right-hand corner, it will have to have a little icon that denotes generated art or something like that.
I think the thing is, it will probably get to a point where AI and real stuff gets melded together, you know, because in the same way that CGI does. And we don't mark stuff that's CGI. So why would we mark anything that was AI? I
think the reason I say that is because I'm looking bigger than photography. No. I just look bigger than photography. If we're starting to talk about deep fakes and stuff like that, if in the UK, say for example, a leader of the opposition or a leader of the main party come out with a video of them verbally abusing, you know, a voter or another member of their party or another member of the opposite party or something, and it's a deep fake,
or in flagrante with a pig.
Say again.
Caught in flagrante with a pig.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, right. Okay. So
wasn't that a few years ago?
It was a few years ago. But the people need to, for the whole system to work, they need to know that what the politician is saying is what the politician is saying. And I think as soon as politicians start to understand the scary power of deepfakes and the need for regulation, and the fact that we have an election coming up fairly soon in the UK, and I'm fairly certain AI is going to play quite a large part in it. I think there's going to be some laws brought in quite quickly. But, you know, there's so many facets to it. I mean, you know, same as you, me and you have spent many hours of an evening generating art and sending it to each other.
Well, actually, not many hours, because you literally can write the code and then go off and make a cup of tea and come back and you get a picture sent to you and you go, oh yeah, it looks okay, just change this.
So much tea. But yeah, look, it's here to stay though. This is the thing. It's not going anywhere. It's definitely here to stay, and you know, we need to really try and figure out our way through it all.
Yeah, I think
if anyone's got any suggestions, fire them in. I would love to hear them.
I think the main thing is to keep talking about it, keep discussing it, keep kind of trying to understand it, and that's the only way that we're going to kind of figure out ways to make it work for us and without totally making us redundant. And that's why, you know, forums like this are quite good for that kind of stuff. And obviously, if you are listening on the pod, you probably know now that we also are putting these out onto YouTube. So fire us a message on Instagram, you know, leave a comment on the YouTube video, whatever. Like, there are numerous ways to get in touch with us now and kind of give us your thoughts on anything that we've discussed, actually.
Yeah, 100%. It would be really useful also from us. Can you please just subscribe to the channel on YouTube? It costs nothing. You don't really get anything in return, but it will mean that we've been told that to monetize the channel on YouTube and try and get a bit of income back from it, we have to have 1,000 subscribers before we do that. So can you just take 10 seconds to go and look up the Exposed Negative on YouTube and click subscribe? You won't even feel like you've done anything, but to us, you will have made our day. So yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
And also sign up subscribe.
To our page. Yeah, like and subscribe. Hit that notification button, etc. Whatever the YouTubers say.
And then they point.
There's going to be something up here or here. But yeah, so if you can do that, and also if you felt that the podcast has been useful, and if you feel like you've been supported by us in any way, we would really appreciate your support. So if you could look us up on Patreon, which is patreon.com/exposednegative. And even if you just did a one-off, bought us a coffee, or signed up for the regulars, we've got a couple now of people who've signed up to regular gifts. So thank you very much, guys. Doing a podcast, turns out, is very expensive and very time-consuming. So if you were able to help us out, we would really appreciate it. Thanks very much for watching the latest episode of The Exposed Negative. If you found it interesting or just want to feedback, or you've got any comments or guest suggestions or anything that we can do to improve the show, please email us at info@exposednegative.com. You can follow us on Instagram @xnegative. And if you want to follow us personally, why wouldn't you? It's @tombarnes.com and @Greg Fennell. And really hope you enjoy the next episode.